Before we start the video, make sure to subscribe to our channel, The Forgotten Files. Also, drop a comment below telling us where in the world you're watching from and what time it is. Alright, let's get started. They say the overseers refused to touch his body after they found him hanging from the rafters, still warm, still trembling, because his one blue eye was wide open, staring straight at them, its color shifting like a living storm. And when they cut him down, that eye didn't close. It watched. It followed. This documentary explores a sealed chapter in American history, one hidden not only by plantation families, but also by local churches, county courts, and the medical boards that quietly destroyed their own records. Between 1839 and 1847, 43 plantations across Virginia, Maryland, Alabama, and the Carolinas reported the same phenomenon. A newly purchased slave, quiet, obedient, harmless, would begin showing signs that terrified even the cruelest masters. And almost always, he had one unmistakable trait: a single, pale blue eye, in contrast to the dark one beside it. Most of these men died within a week of arrival. Some lasted 9 days. None made it to a second week. This is not a ghost story. This is not folklore. This is a pattern, a suppressed, consistent trail of accounts buried under census corrections, altered ledgers, and church fires that conveniently destroyed baptism registries. Many historians believe this phenomenon was erased because it exposed something foundational, something about bloodlines, inherited trauma, and the institutions that quietly shaped early America. But recently uncovered diaries, court transcripts, and unredacted medical reports suggest a far more disturbing truth. A truth that begins with a plantation in Albemarle County and a boy named Elias. The year was 1841, and the Whitlock plantation had just recovered from a scandal. 3 enslaved men vanished in a single night, and the county sheriff wrote the disappearance off as river flight, though there were no tracks, no boats missing, and no signs they ever reached the riverbank. To stabilize the workforce, Samuel Whitlock purchased a small group of new slaves from an auction in Richmond. Among them was a quiet 19-year-old labeled simply as Elias, no history. But Elias had one trait Whitlock noticed immediately. His right eye was a deep brown. His left was ice blue, unnaturally pale, almost without pigment. The auctioneer assured Whitlock it was a harmless defect. Whitlock would later tell his wife it was an omen he should have heeded. Elias never spoke during the journey, never looked up, never resisted. Yet the driver swore that every time he glanced in the rearview mirror, he saw Elias staring at him, silent, expressionless, with only the blue eye, as if the brown one had fallen asleep. The slaves on the wagon whispered that a man with one blue eye was marked by the drowned. Others said such men walked with a borrowed soul. Superstition, the overseer insisted. But even he tied a blessed medallion around his wrist before they arrived. When Elias stepped onto Whitlock land, the dogs began howling uncontrollably, claws scraping the dirt, tails tucked. Even Whitlock's horses refused to approach. By sundown, the mistress of the house would record in her diary, "There is something wrong with that boy. His silence is not the silence of fear. It is the silence of memory." Elias was assigned to a small cabin near the edge of the woods, along with 5 other enslaved men. That night, they claimed they barely slept. They said the air turned cold around Elias, cold enough for their breath to fog. One man swore he heard whispering from Elias's corner. Another insisted he saw him sit upright at exactly the same moment every hour, the blue eye open, the brown one closed. A third man said Elias never blinked. Not once. Just before dawn, one of the older slaves, Isaiah, who rarely spoke, placed his blanket over Elias's shoulders and whispered something to him. Another man tried to ask what Isaiah said, but the elder only shook his head and muttered, "That boy ain't alone in his skin." At breakfast roll call, something else strange happened. Elias, who had remained silent, recited the names of every other slave on the plantation, even though he had never met most of them. Not just their names. Their hidden names, childhood names, mother-given names, names only family would know. When the overseer demanded to know how he learned them, Elias simply tilted his head as if the question confused him. He didn't answer. By afternoon, the house servants began whispering that Whitlock had made a mistake, that Elias was not one of them, that the blue eye meant something walked with him, something watching, remembering, choosing. The local pastor, summoned by Whitlock's wife, said it was just a deformity. But when he looked directly into the blue eye, the pastor stumbled backward, gripping his chest. He insisted the boy carried a grief older than the soil. No one slept peacefully that night. By the third day, a pattern emerged. A chilling, undeniable pattern. Elias did not speak, but he began mimicking people perfectly. He copied the overseer's gait, the cook's laugh, the housemaid's nervous stutter. Sometimes he did it behind their backs. Sometimes he did it while staring straight at them. At one point, he walked into the kitchen and tapped his fingers on the table in a rhythm known only to the mistress's deceased brother, a childhood habit she had never shared with anyone on the plantation. Her face went pale. She dropped the ladle she was holding. Worse still, Elias seemed to know things before they happened. He stepped out of the path seconds before a falling branch crashed down. He moved away from the barn just before a horse kicked the door loose. He avoided the well minutes before a rope snapped inside it. The slaves whispered that he was being guided by something unseen. The overseers growled that he was unnatural, cursed, maybe mad. Yet the dogs remained the clearest sign. Elias could walk through the yard, and every dog would whimper, crawl backward, or attempt to hide behind their handler. On the evening of the fourth day, Whitlock confronted him. "Boy," he said, "what are you?" Elias slowly lifted his face. The brown eye stared blankly. The blue eye flickered, reflecting light like water, in constant motion. Then he said, in a voice that did not sound like his own, "I am what you made, and what you tried to forget." Whitlock staggered back. Elias lowered his head again. He never spoke another word. All records, written, oral, or preserved through plantation folklore, repeat the same terrifying claim. A man with one blue eye destroyed every plantation within a week of arrival. Not by rebellion, not by violence, but by something far stranger, something psychological, spiritual, and unexplainable. Whitlock, nervous but not yet convinced, believed he could control Elias. He ordered the overseers to keep him isolated, fed separately, and watched constantly. But that only made things worse. People who watched him too long reported vivid hallucinations. Flashes of bodies underwater, voices muffled by dirt, cold hands reaching through darkness. One overseer ran screaming into the woods, never found again. Another slit his own palm to let the water out. A third insisted that Elias stood beside his bed all night, though the man had been locked in a cabin across the property. The mistress asked Whitlock to send the boy away. The pastor refused to come back. Isaiah, the elder slave, refused to sleep indoors, claiming the walls amplified the dead. And all the while, Elias sat quiet, obedient, harmless, yet radiating the unmistakable sense that someone, something, many things hovered behind him, leaning close whenever anyone drew near. He never smiled, never flinched, never seemed humanly tired. The slaves had a name for men like him, a name whispered in hushed tones. Riverborn. They claimed he was tied to every secret burial, every drowned soul, every sin buried beneath early American soil. And Whitlock was about to learn why. On the fifth night, the plantation reached a breaking point. Several house servants claimed they heard whispers rising from beneath the floorboards, soft at first, then clearer, then unmistakably human. Voices, dozens of them, calling names that had not belonged to anyone living. One girl fainted when she heard her grandmother's name spoken in a voice she had never heard before. Another swore the whispers matched the rhythm of drowning breath, short, irregular gasps struggling to break the surface. Whitlock blamed hysteria, but the mistress, who had always prided herself on reason, demanded the pastor return and bless the house. He refused. He simply said, "You have stirred the restless. Let them settle or be swallowed by them." That night, Isaiah, the quiet elder, approached Elias's cabin and knelt in front of him. He asked, voice trembling, "Boy, who follows you?" For the first time, Elias lifted his head slowly, as though responding not to the question but to a presence behind it. He placed his hand on Isaiah's forehead. Isaiah collapsed instantly, shaking violently, tears streaming down his face. When he came to, he could barely speak, but he managed 3 words. "They are rising." The next morning, Isaiah refused to go near the river. He refused to drink water. He refused to bathe, because in his dreams he had seen them, the ones who never made it to marked graves, the ones dumped into swamps, the ones shackled and thrown overboard. And they were following Elias, moving with him like a shadow with many hands. By the 6th day, the mystery deepened. Whitlock discovered Elias standing in the study beside a locked cabinet. The key had been hidden in a drawer Whitlock hadn't opened in years. Somehow, Elias had it in his hand. He opened the cabinet, pulled out a leather-bound ledger, the plantation burial record no one was supposed to see, and placed it on the desk. Whitlock demanded to know who told him about the ledger. Elias said nothing. When Whitlock opened the book, he froze. There were names he did not recognize, dates that predated his ownership, and entries from decades earlier that detailed deaths never reported to the county. Secret drownings, unmarked burials, sicknesses explained away, punishments erased. The Whitlock family had been hiding atrocities long before Samuel took over, but Elias had found them without being told they existed. As Whitlock scanned the pages, a drop of water hit the ledger. Then another. He looked up. Elias's blue eye was leaking tears, clear water tears, not human tears. They streamed down his cheek in thin, unnatural lines. Whitlock stumbled back, and then, in a voice that was not his own, Elias recited every name in the ledger, every forgotten soul, every life erased. He spoke them with the tone of someone drowning mid-sentence. Whitlock reported later, though the diary entry was half-burned, that he felt the room tilt, as though sinking. Elias closed the ledger gently. For the first time, Whitlock realized the truth. The blue eye was not seeing. It was remembering. The slaves in the cabins woke to a terror they could never forget. As the wind died and the crickets fell silent, scratching began along the walls. Not animal scratching. Human scratching. Dozens of fingers dragging across wood. Long, slow, deliberate strokes. Some of the men pressed their ears to the walls and swore they heard choking sounds. Gurgling. Wet breath. Bodies pressed against the planks from the outside. No one dared open the door. But Elias stood and walked toward the cabin wall, placing his palm against it. Instantly, every scratch stopped. Silence fell like a dropped curtain. One of the younger boys whispered, "Who is it? What do they want?" Elias turned, and though he did not speak, the answer was clear. They wanted to be remembered. That night, Isaiah performed a ritual prayer, something half remembered from African tradition, half forbidden by plantation rules. He begged the spirits to leave the living in peace. But as he prayed, the candles flickered violently, and the flame bent toward Elias as though pulled by a current. The slaves realized something horrifying. The spirits were not attacking. They were following him, clinging to him, using him. Elias had become the vessel through which they resurfaced. The boy with one blue eye was their anchor, and their doorway. The 7th day was the day every plantation feared, the day no man with one blue eye had survived before. And from sunrise, the entire plantation felt the shift. The air turned heavy, suffocating. The wells tasted metallic. Animals refused to eat. Shadows stretched where they should not have. Whitlock ordered Elias chained, convinced restraint would stop whatever was coming. But when the overseers tried to bind him, the chains rusted instantly, crumbling like old leaves. Even hardened men stepped back in fear. At noon, Elias walked to the river without being summoned. Slaves watched from a distance, trembling. He stepped into the water slowly. When the river reached his knees, the current stopped moving, not slowed, but stopped, becoming flat as a mirror. The blue eye glowed faintly, like light reflecting off deep water. Suddenly, bubbles surfaced around him. Circles. Dozens. As if many bodies were rising from below. Isaiah screamed for everyone to run. Whitlock shouted to fetch guns. The mistress fell to her knees, begging God to intervene. But Elias remained still. Then the river erupted. Hands, translucent, skeletal, soaked in silt, shot upward, grabbing his legs, his waist, his arms. Not to harm him. To hold him. Claim him. Elias did not struggle. He closed his brown eye. The blue one stayed open. As he sank beneath the surface, a final whisper escaped his lips. "I remember for them. Now you will too." The river swallowed him whole. He never resurfaced. The moment Elias disappeared, the river returned to its natural flow, but everything else fell apart. Whitlock staggered back from the shore as though struck. The overseers fled in different directions, some dropping to their knees, retching in terror. The slaves stood frozen, knowing they had witnessed a crossing between worlds. Within minutes, something impossible happened. Water began dripping from the rafters of the main house, clear, cold, silent. Even though the skies were cloudless. Every room, every hallway, every drawer, every Bible on every shelf. Wet, as if the river had seeped into the house itself, carrying the memories Elias had held. The plantation doctor found Whitlock in the study, trembling uncontrollably, staring at the burial ledger. Though the book was closed, water dripped from its binding. "Burn it," the doctor whispered. But Whitlock shook his head. "If I burn it, they will come for me." That night, Isaiah gathered the slaves and declared the truth. He did not die, he delivered them. And now they walk this land until their names are spoken. The slaves prepared to leave the plantation, quietly, quickly, emptied cabins, packed bare essentials. But before they could take their first step, every candle in the quarters extinguished at once. Darkness swallowed them. And then, the knocking began, not on the doors, from beneath the ground, as though something buried was finally ready to speak. The knocking grew louder, slow, rhythmic, and unbearably deliberate. It echoed through the dirt like fists pounding from inside a sealed coffin. The slaves clung to one another, whispering prayers. Isaiah raised his hands and shouted for silence. The ground stopped knocking. For a moment, there was nothing. Then the earth breathed. A long, shuddering exhale rose from the soil beneath them, carrying with it a scent of river mud and rotting wood. The floorboards vibrated gently, just enough to make the lantern glass tremble. Isaiah knelt, pressing his ear to the ground. He whispered, "They want their names spoken." The slaves gathered close. Isaiah began naming the forgotten. Amara, Joseph, Lutha, Daniel, Ruth. But after the fifth name, Isaiah froze, eyes widening. He whispered, "These aren't just the Whitlock dead, they're from the other plantations too." The enslaved men and women realized what the overseers would never admit. Elias was not bound to Whitlock alone. He carried the memory of every soul erased across the region. Suddenly, the earth convulsed. Dust rose like smoke, and a single word echoed through the cabin, not spoken aloud, but vibrating the air. Remember. The night ended with no sleep. No one dared close their eyes, because every time they blinked, they saw Elias's blue eye staring back, watching, remembering, summoning. While the quarters trembled, the big house fell into chaos. Whitlock, once a proud man, had begun unraveling. By dawn, he had torn down every mirror, screaming that he saw drowning faces staring back from the glass. He ripped sheets off beds, insisting they were wet with ghosts. He refused to enter the kitchen because he claimed the pots rang with the sound of chains. His wife tried to calm him, but when she touched his arm, he recoiled in horror. "Don't you feel it? The water? The cold? They're in the walls." He locked himself in the study with the burial ledger, refusing food or water. The slaves watched from the yard as the once mighty master descended into madness. By midday, Whitlock stumbled onto the balcony, clothes soaked, hair dripping river water. But it hadn't rained. No river water was anywhere near the house. He screamed at the fields, "Take your boy back. Take him back." A silence fell. Birds stopped singing. The wind died instantly. Whitlock fell to his knees, sobbing. Some claimed they saw hands, translucent, waterlogged, rest themselves on his shoulders for a moment before disappearing. Others claimed Whitlock's eyes flickered blue for a second. But all agreed on one thing. The haunting was no longer outside the house. It had entered him. As fear consumed the plantation, Isaiah sought answers in memory. He gathered the enslaved around the old oak tree, far enough from the river to breathe freely. The elder spoke in a voice tired yet resolute. This land been cursed long before Whitlock, long before any of us were born. He told them about the first plantations, how the dead were buried without markers, how bodies were thrown into shallow pits, rivers, swamps, and forgotten to time. Those souls got no place to rest, Isaiah said. No grave, no name, no peace. Then he spoke of the legend carried from Africa, a myth of the rememberer, a human vessel the dead choose when their stories go untold. Someone who hears what the living bury and speaks what the earth cannot swallow. Isaiah looked toward the river. That boy, Elias, he didn't choose this. He was chosen. The slaves understood the truth. Elias wasn't cursed. He was the bridge. And the bridge had collapsed into the river, releasing everything held back for generations. Isaiah warned that the haunting wouldn't stop until the truth was exposed, publicly, undeniably. The dead want witnesses, he said. Not whispers. Not diaries. Witnesses. The slaves made a pact to flee that night. But the dead had other plans. As the sun disappeared, a thick mist crept across the plantation, starting from the river and rolling outward like a quiet, deliberate tide. The dogs howled in terror. The horses kicked their stalls. Even the wind seemed to retreat from the approaching fog. Isaiah ordered everyone to stay indoors, but the mist seeped through cracks, keyholes, and broken boards. Those who breathed it felt cold memories rushing into their lungs. Images of shackles, water closing overhead, hands reaching for sunlight that never returned. Inside the big house, the mistress collapsed to her knees. She felt a phantom hand grip her ankle. Then another, and another. She screamed as she was pulled across the floor, dragged by invisible forces that left wet handprints behind. Whitlock heard her cries, but did nothing. He stood in the doorway of his study, whispering to the ledger. They're coming for me. They know. They know. The slaves in their cabins huddled together, chanting prayers. But the mist only thickened, and within it, shadowy figures began to take shape. Faces blurred, eyes hollow, bodies dripping river water. The silhouettes didn't attack. They simply watched, observed, waited, because they knew dawn would bring the revelation they had waited for decades to deliver. Before sunrise, Isaiah sensed something change. The ground stopped knocking. The mist pulled back. Silence filled the plantation like a held breath. Isaiah approached the big house cautiously. He found Whitlock's study door ajar. Whitlock sat motionless, staring at the burial ledger. His clothes were soaked, but the floor around him was dry. Isaiah stepped closer. The ledger was dripping blood. Names inside the book began rewriting themselves. Ink shifting, letters rearranging, dates correcting. Hidden atrocities rising to the surface like corpses floating upward. Whitlock whispered, "They showed me everything." Isaiah asked how. "They drowned me," Whitlock said. "Not in water. In memory." The master's face had aged 20 years overnight. His hair was white. His eyes were empty. Then he handed the ledger to Isaiah. "Take it," he said. "If I touch it again, they'll pull me down for good." Isaiah accepted it reluctantly. The moment he did, the ledger's bleeding stopped. The room grew unbearably cold. And a voice, Elias's voice, whispered, "Tell them the truth. All of it." Isaiah gathered the enslaved men, women, and children. He showed them the ledger, exposed pages documenting decades of murder, burial cover-ups, and drownings hidden by plantation families and county officials. "Elias gave us this," he said. "He wants justice, not fear." They prepared to flee, but not aimlessly. Isaiah insisted they take the ledger north, to the abolitionists, to the newspapers, to anyone who would listen. "His story don't end here," Isaiah told them. "It ends where the truth can burn." They packed quickly, food, clothes, tools. Some grabbed keepsakes, others clutched children. Just as they stepped into the yard, the river roared violently behind them. A huge wave surged upward, impossible for a river, then crashed back down. The surface bubbled, as if something enormous moved beneath. Isaiah shouted, "Go!" They fled into the woods. Behind them, the plantation seemed to groan, wood cracking, walls bending, doors slamming open and shut. The dead had risen. The living had escaped. And Whitlock was left to face what he had inherited. By morning, the plantation was unrecognizable. The big house had partially collapsed, roof caved, walls buckled, water covered the floors. The fields were scorched black, though there had been no fire. Every portrait in the house was ruined, faces scratched out, frames warped, glass cracked. Whitlock wandered through the debris barefoot, muttering nonsense. He looked like a man who had drowned on dry land. The sheriff arrived, summoned by neighbors, but when he questioned Whitlock, the man could only say, "They're walking. All of them. They're walking now." The sheriff ordered him arrested, claiming insanity, but as the deputies tried to cuff him, Whitlock screamed and backed away. "Don't take me near the river." But they dragged him anyway, and the moment his boots touched the moist bank, he stiffened, then began screaming, not in fear, in recognition. "They're waiting for me," he sobbed. "They've been waiting all this time." Whitlock collapsed face first into the mud and never rose again. The official record claimed heart failure, but those who were there said something unnatural. The mud didn't stain him. It swallowed him. Isaiah and the fleeing group traveled for days, moving at night, resting in abandoned barns, guided by the stars. But the haunting hadn't ended. Some nights, they woke to wet footprints circling their camp. Other nights, small puddles formed beneath sleepers, even in dry weather. Children whispered that Elias walked beside them. Not frightening. Protective. Isaiah secretly agreed. One night, a riverboat patrol spotted them. The group had no chance to hide. But before the patrol could reach them, a dense fog rolled across the water, so thick the boat could not move. The officers became disoriented, hearing voices echoing across the surface. Isaiah realized the dead were helping them. By the 10th night, the group reached a safe farmhouse on the outskirts of Pennsylvania, an underground railroad stop. Isaiah handed the ledger to the abolitionist woman who ran the house. "This book," he said, "holds the truth of every life swallowed by that land." She opened the cover and gasped. "What do you want me to do with it?" Isaiah answered, "Let the world choke on the truth." The abolitionists passed the ledger north, copying its contents, sending it to newspapers and churches. When journalists saw the details, dates, names, confessions of killings, many refused to publish out of fear. Others published immediately, outraged. A scandal erupted across multiple states. Plantation families denied everything. County officials burned their own archives. Pastors destroyed baptism logs to hide the unmarked burials. But it was too late. The ledger had already been duplicated, and the haunting spread. People across states reported strange occurrences. Mirrors fogging without reason. Walls dripping clean water. Footsteps echoing in basements. Whispers in locked rooms speaking names no one recognized. The dead weren't haunting Whitlock alone anymore. They were haunting the country that forgot them. And Elias, wherever he was, had become their eternal messenger. Years later, when the Civil War began, soldiers reported seeing a young black man with one blue eye on battlefields, never fighting, only watching. Some said he stood beside mass graves. Some said he appeared near rivers swollen with bodies. Others swore he guided wounded men to safety in the dead of night. He never spoke. He never aged. But he always watched with that single, storm-colored eye. Modern historians dismissed these accounts as myth. But in 1932, when a drought emptied a section of the Albemarle River, something horrifying surfaced. A human skeleton, preserved unnaturally well, with one eye socket stained deep blue. Locals insisted the skull was smiling. The county buried it quietly. But the night after the burial, every house within 5 miles found its floors mysteriously soaked with river water. A reminder, a warning, a memory resurfacing. And now, as you listen to this story, one truth remains. Elias did not vanish in that river. He became it. Every forgotten soul, every drowned voice, every buried truth. When we speak his name, the water stirs. When we deny him, the walls drip. And when we try to forget, that blue eye opens again, watching, remembering, waiting for us to face what we buried.